G'day guys, and welcome back to episode 2 of the Adventures of Pandemic Race Car Building. I'll be your host, Josh Robinson. I know I say this every time, but I just wanted to say a heartfelt thank you for all of the really nice comments you left on my last video. The big news this week was that Qantas, the Australian national airline carrier, which is kind of like our equivalent of American Airlines, cancelled all international flights for the next 12 months. So it means that I won't actually get to go home and see my friends and family for almost 2 years. So getting to see all those really nice messages and comments of support on our Eurofighter build really meant a lot to me, and it really brightened up my week. So thank you for that, it's truly appreciated. Strangely, the good news is that even with the shelter-in-place restrictions in place in Texas, we've managed to find some loopholes in that. If you live under the same household as a person, a lot of those restrictions don't apply. And as fortune would have it, I have 3 spare beds in my house. So my mate from Las Vegas and my 2 mates from Houston are now officially living with me so we can get this build back on track. Per the Formula Drift regulations, you can only make your own channel under the car in the floor pan to run the fuel lines. You must find an alternative route, usually in the transmission tunnel or through the cabin for the oil and coolant lines. In our case, because of the lack of space under an E92, we went with the cutout option for the fuel and ran the oil and water under the passenger seat in the cabin. Meanwhile, Dan worked on cutting away the structure in the front and the forwardmost suspension mounting points so we could mount the front bash bars. We installed the nitrous outlet bottle to be on the opposite side diagonal to where the driver sits to help offset my weight and give a more even cross weight. I bought what was advertised as a 7 3/4 inch compass from Home Depot with the plan to use it to mark the HGK carbon shroud and cut it out to install the GC cooling fans. Except for some random reason, it only reached to 5.5 inches. With time against us, we got some TIG wire, sharpened it on the belt sander, and used it to create an extension. From there, we used the sharpened tip as a scribe to mark the line that we needed to cut. As you can see here, I am using a Dremel to round out the edges of this carbon fibre shroud. Something that is really noteworthy here is that carbon fibre is a lot like fiberglass in that when those fibres become airborne, they get stuck in your skin and they become insanely itchy and painful. So please believe me when I say, make sure you cover up your arms whenever you're using fiberglass or carbon fiber, and it'll make you sleep a lot easier and a lot less itchy at night. This is the push button quick release system for the rear quarter panel glass. It never ceases to amaze me how something seemingly so quick and easy to fabricate and install can eat up time so quickly. The good thing is that these will mean that all you have to do is push 3 buttons, the rear quarter panel glass will pop out, and from there behind the passenger seat you can replenish the nitrous bottles, or from behind the driver's seat you can access the cool shirt system, change out the ice and water and reinstall it without having to mess around. Meanwhile, everyone made fun of me for being an archaeologist, chipping away at the burnt factory sound deadening, with the occasional mishap, with so many chefs in the kitchen all working over the top of each other. I had an amazing revelation shortly after I jumped off the boat from Australia to the US in 2016 with my ute, and that is cutting out the top of the transmission tunnel. It not only reduces the weight of the car, but more importantly, it means that if you ever need to drop a gearbox, all you have to do is pull the shroud off, and then the 2 top bolts of the bell housing are exposed. It means you can drop a gearbox in about 1/10 of the time than it would if you left it in place. So an interesting one that's popped up in the last few years is Formula Drift teams using a single rear brake caliper. I've always been very strongly against this because you get interference between the foot brake and the handbrake, but apparently using a proportioning valve, you can reduce that and reduce the cost and reduce the complexity and the weight of the system. I use a Willwood caliper and pedal assembly, so I'm going to try running that in conjunction with a Willwood proportioning valves, and for the pre-season at least, give it a shot and see if it works for me, and hopefully we can make it a thing going forward. With the engine finally assembled, we put it in the car for the first test fit. One of the things that really impressed us with the E92 chassis was how much room there was behind the engine between it and the firewall. If you compare that to my ute, you can see just how tight that is through the back section. Last year at Road Atlanta, we had a problem trying to get to a crank angle sensor, and you can see that there just wasn't really much room to get to it, whereas with the E92, that's not the case, and from the factory, there's just so much more room through that section. Just started work on the HGK carbon fiber rear windshield replacement. This is a multi-purpose unit because it not only acts as a duct for the radiator so the GC cooling fans can pull air through it, it also gives us access to the radium fuel cell and also the BC Racing remote reservoirs. Like almost everything on this car, it's held in by M6 riv nuts, unless of course it's the engine, in which case it's a pair of M8s. Much like fabricating the quick releases for the quarter glass, the devil is in the detail for this as well. You start by marking a 20mm section around the outside of the perspex and then tear that away. Next, we took it outside and gave it a quick spray with black etch primer so that when we finally install it from the outside, that will hide the cut lines and also give it a much neater appearance and hide the metal surround that it's covering. Next, a thin layer of double-sided foam tape gets installed. This will reduce the wind chatter. If you can imagine all the air pressure that comes through the side windows while the car is drifting sideways north of 60 mile or 100 kilometers an hour, it's pretty substantial. So all that air pressure has to go somewhere and it's going to go back onto this glass. So it will not only reduce the noise from wind chatter, it will also help to reduce the amount of rain that can come in should that be an event. To finish up, the perspex or Lexan, depending on where in the world you're from, gets installed. It gets held in place with pop rivets for this one, unlike the side windows that were held in with the quick releases. Because this glass will never be removed, we put it in with a pop rivet into the carbon, and you can see just how neat that painted mark ends up down the sides. It hides the carbon shroud there on the very edge and gives it a very neat appearance. To try and get a more even weight distribution, we mounted the radium fuel cell on top of the axle. It was kind of cool to see a few weeks after this, James Dean did the same thing with his E92, so I feel like we're probably on the right track trying to get this weight further forward. So you can see the small factory holes in the sill here. On the HGK side skirt, they've got these small tabs where they've extended the carbon Kevlar. So basically all I'm going to do to mount these is widen that hole out to be an M6, got the drill here, and then put a riv nut in there like this one, and fire that away, and then we'll have a nice home and 4 mounting spots or 5 mounting spots for the side skirts. And this is what it looks like all finished. M6 riv nuts in position, onto the next thing. So my next job is to mount these tyre temperature sensors that will be running this year, thanks to the guys at AIM Sportline. You can see the little bit of material that I've got here, just a small bit of tin. Basically how these things mount is on the wheel arch in here. You can see where we've got the factory arch in there. That has to mount just in there like that. You see there's 2 very small, if this thing will focus, we've got 2 very small bolt holes in the side there. So basically that sheet of tin will just get cut to size and drilled, and then we'll tack it in place in the wheel arch here, and 2 bolts will go through and mount that in position. And this is what the final product looks like. We'll remove it before the chassis gets sandblasted and painted, and then reinstalled during the final fit. So I've just been trying to figure out a way to mount the potentiometers on the Eurofighter, and it suddenly occurred to me that on these BCs, they have a mount for the remote reservoirs. So we're just going to pull these out and have a quick look. Basically this piece just here, if I can wrestle this out. There we go. You can see where that usually mounts and holds the external reservoir onto the shock absorber. So we think that we can maybe repurpose that bracket and re-engineer it slightly, and that'll hold the potentiometer in the perfect spot for us. Also, unfortunately this isn't mine, but I think you guys might like it if you like carbon Kevlar things. This is a carbon fiber freestyle jet ski that the guys from Crash Industries have been working on. Check this thing out. So we stripped down the shock absorber, gave it a quick test fit onto the base there and up to the top to check the length and to try and come up with a strategy for how we're going to mount that to the top bolt. And since we don't have a $1 million milling machine sitting in my workshop, we sent it back to Houston with Robbie, who did a little outsider for us in his lunch break and took care of it. The purpose of a potentiometer is to data log shock travel. So what we've done here is taken a reservoir mount off the ute from last year that got damaged in a crash and cut it through there, milled off the end and milled a pocket in here. So now the AIM potentiometer goes into here, the bolt holds it in position like that. On the top we've taken another bolt, drilled and tapped a hole in the end, And now this bolt slides in here like this and screws into that bolt like that. And that will data log our shock travel. This is what the finished product looks like. We've got our WiseFab kit down there. That top shock bolt runs through the BC Racing coilover and into the top of the AIM potentiometer. It comes down the bottom to our repurposed reservoir mount there, and the whole system is finished. I think Robbie absolutely knocked it out of the park on this. I'm really happy with the design. So I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's where we're up to on our suspension. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for this week. I've just made it out to Motorsport Ranch in Houston to drive the Eurofighter for the first time. It is the Saturday before Formula Drift starts, so I don't know if I'm going to have time to get the video out to let you know why in the world I'm only driving the car a couple of days before the event starts, but I'll do my best. Until we catch up, stay well.